Bit of background to Scott Brownrigg. We're the oldest architectural practice in the United Kingdom, founded in 1905, continuous practice. We have a heritage that we like to align with the Barony, so to speak. We're in the top 10 architectural practices in the UK, top 50 in the world. We compete with all of the good and the great. What's interesting for us about the Barony is that it follows on a kind of architectural thesis, if you will, of studies that we've undertaken previously globally. Perhaps the last one most relevant, excuse me, that Greg asked me to mention was a scheme that we did for a Maori tribal group on North Island in Rotorua called Mount Nongatar. And if you think the topography is challenging on the Barony, try Mount Nongatar. But it's a socio-cultural and well-being facility that Terry and I worked collectively on, that actually resulted in a master plan that was shortlisted for a World Architecture Festival Award in Amsterdam 2 years ago. And it has attracted circa £25 million worth of government investment in terms of the delivery. Anyway, this is called design concepts. We're at design concept stage, but really perhaps just a little bit behind them. We were asked to do, Stephen asked us to look at a capacity study for the site, setting a brief of 350 units, whatever units might mean. Let's call them villas in this instance, across the site, and to see what that would look like with all of the necessary supporting accommodation that both Irene and Andy had set out. I happen to be one of the 4 main board directors, but also head of design and research, called our design research unit. So the heritage and history of the site and the way in which the site has been organised to grasp that essential notion of genius loci, that sense of place, is critical for us, because otherwise this could be anywhere. And we don't want this to be anywhere. We want this to be unique and special. It's quite interesting that the layout of the Barony, even as a colliery, followed 2 principles: one, process, and the other one, topography. And we think that's quite interesting as an architectural proposition to lead us forward and to root the scheme in that sense of place. Equally, as everybody's articulated, the cool A-frame that exists as part of a heritage of the site is a significant marker and icon. And that image on the right-hand side of the previous model actually implies a few things to us about a sense of order, a sense of priority, a sense of a priori, if you will. This site is not tabula rasa, it's not a blank sheet of canvas. It actually requires a response that's grounded in that history and heritage. And we think that's critical. So, what does all that mean? Wow. Well, as I mentioned, the site is organised into a series of zones and special places that are part of the existing condition, part of some of those things as found. It's a master plan that we would describe as episodic, a series of episodes of events that align themselves along specific routes that make the place legible, but also make it very special, very unique. I'll take you through the plan organisation. Now, as some of you will know, there's a pretty brutal looking industrial unit on the opposite side of the road that's got a chimney. That has a positive effect in terms of energy, but a detrimental effect in terms of what the environment feels like. So our first kind of visual clues and devices detach us from that particular world. So we move away from the road and that particular industrial unit. Can everybody see my cursor?
Yep, I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, good. So the idea is that the point of entrance to the Barony makes this place special. So we pull that as far along the site as possible. And then we use this traditional architectural device, planning device, if you will, of the country estate road. which actually wraps all the way around the outside of the A-frame, which sits in the middle of what Andy called gardens. I call a bit of scrubland, but we can elaborate on that later. So that processional route around the A-frame gives that sense of arrival, that sense of purpose. And the arrival point is a collection of pavilions that are contained by this big service wall that's conceived in black limestone, effectively as a gabion basket wall. Now, this building acts as a threshold from one world into another. So it acts as a screen, it acts as that point of departure where you move from one space to another. There's opportunity for car drop-off here, and then you never see your car again until you have to leave, unless you're a day visitor, and then there's additional day parking in the middle. So this is the reception device. It not only acts as that threshold, but it also kind of represents an embrace, if you will, the open arms of a welcoming hug, or a cwtch, as they would say in South Wales. What we then have then is a market garden facility that's both orchard, that supports what we call our productive landscape centre. So the idea about this is that produce and provenance that's generated on the site can be taken from simple product, and Terry will explain this later about the progression of the grape, how the grape becomes wine bottle, becomes art, becomes a visitor experience. And we can use produce that's generated on the site in our productive landscape facility, which is this one here. That then speaks in a radial form to what's called the Projective Ecologies organisation, which takes ecology, makes it a social device, makes it a sustainable device, and maps that out onto the region. So it's a point of research, but these things add value to the development as well. So over here, for instance, the idea of an apiary, we take honey, we turn it into mead, we distill it into gin, we use heather developments, Scottish national materials to actually inform the whole notion of well-being within the site. There's a group of lodges here. There is effectively 3 types of accommodation: lodge, treehouse, geodesic dome. The geodesic domes are placed in areas that are already kind of flat, already kind of open. So there's one zone just here and another zone just here. And the idea about those is that they will be rewilded with oats, barley, heather to actually encourage a diverse ecology. This one will also include a series of reed ponds for water runoff as it falls down the slope. This is virtually the high point here, and then it tumbles down to Luga water at the end. There are a number of additional pavilions that will contain yoga and fitness studios that are part of an extended natural wild environment, part of that architectural heritage, if you will, of modernism that erodes the boundary from inside to outside. So this is here is the first group of tree houses. These are lodges that are connected. So the idea in this post-COVID environment, Terry and I talk about a dispersed hotel. So it is a hotel, they are hotel rooms, they just happen to be fractured and dispersed across the site. So you can occupy them at all times, but they also form family clusters as well. So they operate in terms of both and mode rather than either or. There's also then a new spa facility that will sit right on the Luga water, and we draw part of the water in to make that relaxing, quintessentially kind of Zen environment that makes for a special place. Idea at the moment is that this is bespoke to residents, whereas there will be an additional spa and therapy rooms as part of the reception building that will be open to day visitors. And then, as you can see, various tree houses, geodesic domes, and lodges then form very different character areas, and that's important across a site that's so broad and vast, that actually makes special places and respond to the specific nature of both the topography and the landscape as we move around. I'm not going to bore you with this plan, but what this demonstrates is the development. We get 344 units. Sorry about that, Stephen. We're 6 short of your target of 350. But it's conceptually correct, we think, at the moment. This generates circa just shy of 30,000 square meters of accommodation across the site. And what this does facilitate is a phased development. So in terms of investment pattern, but also in terms of strategic master plan that might take a number of years to be built out, that kind of framework of development facilitates changes in marketplace, changes in accommodation, and allows us to respond to those things. What is really critical, though, is that that's the current tree coverage across the site. So actually, very little of the built environment is seen. It's really secluded. It's really unique. It's really part of a special environment that we think is cool. So the architecture is unashamedly contemporary, but it's still grounded in some of those geometric propositions that were part of the A-frame, part of the organisation of the site, as well as evoking some of the memory of Scottish heritage and Scottish architecture. So the principal reception building here, which will have opportunities for conference facilities, a visitor and reception facility. The visitor facility will talk about the site, talk about the A-frame, bars, restaurants, stacked accommodation. So we have this really nice idea that because this sits almost at the top of the site, but not quite, we can take some of the spa rooms up to the 3rd level so that you can view out over the hills, which is just a breathtaking view from that part. And then pool and big gym and dance studio at the end. This is kind of unfolded to make it more legible. Materials are all grounded in that response to natural environment. So zinc, timber, Corten, which is rusty steel. We use Corten specifically because Munsell's colour theory, green landscape, the opposite of green is red. So these little red accents, these little moments, act as points of legibility and orientation as we move around the site. And we think that the composition is entirely appropriate. And there you can see that big black gabion basket wall that acts to distribute services, acts as that threshold, that demarcation from one type of world to the other. And then you can see that there are opportunities for green roofs, PV roofs. Even the buildings themselves can be CLT and timber frame. So we may not have to use, other than where we need to, concrete for embodied energy on the site. So it becomes incredibly carbon neutral. In fact, we plan to make it carbon positive. So you can see here, there's the embrace of the welcome and the arrival sequence. We like to talk about architectural attitudes, what our attitude is to the architecture and the site. And these sketches talk about the tree houses. Now, the tree houses afford us to bring a little bit more density in here, because as you can see on the drawing on the left, they can sit in various parts of the section of the site. So you can get people close together because they either look below one another or above one another, but they also give an entirely different experience of the site too. So there is an undercover story, there's an under canopy story, then there's a top canopy story. And these are all different things that actually make this place really special and a terrific visitor environment. So windows that look up to the sky, windows that look down to the ground. It feels like you're living amongst the trees, and this is one of those CGIs that represents that. Slightly off-piece, but being a bit poetic. When I saw the site, it reminded me of the opening sequence to Dr. Zhivago, those whole series of silver birch trees, and the background changes. And what we've done here is try to generate an architecture that's inspired by that background, but also actually acts as a backdrop to the silver birch. So they become vertical columns. And likewise, you can see we have the idea of the treehouse as a suspended monocoque structure that sits on an abstract forest of columns to kind of represent the silver birch forest that it sits in. These are diagrams that we look at that talk about that idea of projective ecologies, how we can take ecologies even from the airport, even from that point of arrival, onto the master plan and then map them out. And then the productive landscapes is about buildings that generate all sorts of opportunities. So, you know, there are organisations in Scotland that create jewellery from heather. Why can't we do that? There are organisations that take heather and turn it into gin. Why can't we do that? So that all generates this idea of a circular economy that sits within the site, but becomes very special, and it becomes very purposeful and meaningful, not only to the visitor, but to the local community as well. So you can see the idea of the timber abstract representation of the A-frame that sets out a structural and organisational pattern on the site that makes this place legible, enjoyable, and a really cool place to be. And finally, then the lodges down on the Luga water, because Irene and Andy were clever in their negotiation of where the boundary was going to be. We actually own half of the Luga water. So the idea that these pavilions can gently touch their toes in that river and you become completely immersed in that experience, we think is a really cool thing to do. And they're kind of organic in their architectural expression. So they look like pieces of coal or anthracite. You know, the frames look like fossils. They all talk about this special genius loci. And that's enough of me going on.